This section introduces neuroplasticity and what the word actually buys. Neuroplasticity is a genus, not a single mechanism. It names any change in a nervous system at all, a category so broad it predicts nothing until you name the species underneath it. The chapter's move is deflationary. Nervous systems evolve to change, so plasticity is the default state of the substrate, not a distinguished power. The slogan, "Rewire your brain," inverts this, selling the ambient as though it were exceptional. The history makes the same point. Malacarne found richer cerebella in trained dogs. James coined the word plasticity. Cajal first asserted that the adult brain stays malleable, then recanted and hardened the reverse into dogma before the 1960s revived the idea. The so-called revolution is really a pendulum, rediscovery mistaken for discovery, mistaken for discovery. What the introduction buys the book is a word emptied of content, which forces every later chapter to specify which change it means. This section explains sensory substitution, the finding that a piece of cortex is defined by the computation it runs, not by the sense that normally feeds it. Strip a cortical region of the input it was born to receive, and it does not go dark. It recruits whatever signal still reaches it. Paul Bach. Eureda's blind subject saw through 400 vibrating pins pressed against the back. The visual cortex then lit up under touch, under braille, under tongue clicks, even under generated verbs. The lesson dissolves strict localization. An area is not defined by the modality it carries, but by the computation it performs on whatever arrives. The visual where and what split survives intact, even when the input is echo rather than light. The region is what it does, not what it feels. This is substrate, agnostic processing. The cortex is indifferent to the channel, so long as structured signal comes through. This part explains developmental plasticity as sculpting by subtraction, not assembly from a blueprint. The developing brain grossly overproduces. It makes far more neurons than it needs, and each neuron wires far more synapses than it will keep. Then it lets survival be won competitively against a deliberately scarce signal. Levi Montalcini's nerve growth factor is the anchor. Target tissues secrete a limited survival factor. The neurons outnumber the supply, and the losers switch on their own caspase suicide. The same move repeats at the synapse. Promiscuous overconnection is trimmed by electrical activity until each muscle fiber keeps one axon. The generative primitive is selectionism, a Darwinian economy running inside the organism, scarcity as the sculptor. Predict any developmental case by asking what is overmade and what resource it competes for. This section explains synaptic plasticity, the idea that memory lives in the tunable strength of the junction between cells. Memory has no single cell that holds it. It lives in the adjustable weight of the synapse, the junction between two cells. That is the whole move of the chapter. Plasticity is the synapse made adjustable, and everything downstream, learning, habit, addiction, is that one knob turned. The knob is coincidence gated. The NMDA receptor sits behind a magnesium plug that clears only when presynaptic glutamate and postsynaptic firing arrive together. Calcium then enters, and the connection strengthens precisely when both cells are active at once. Hebb's line, neurons that fire together, wire together, names exactly this, AND gate. He guessed it in 1949, and Bliss and Lomo found it in the rabbit hippocampus in 1973. Run it backwards, with low-frequency, uncorrelated firing, and the weight decays instead. This is long-term depression, LTD. This section explains how a century-old dogma about the adult brain fell and what its falling revealed. For 100 years, the ruling belief was that the adult brain adds no neurons. That belief rested on a null result. Cahal never saw immature neurons, so he pronounced the wiring fixed, ended, immutable. Absence of evidence was read as evidence of absence. The chapter runs the standard falsification of an argument from absence. Such an argument collapses the instant a technique makes the invisible countable. Radioactive thymidine and later bromdeoxyuridine tags DNA only in dividing cells. So a newborn neuron finally leaves a positive mark in the rat dentate gyrus, in songbird nuclei that regrow each spring, and at last in the human hippocampus at a rate of about 700 cells a day. This is neuroplasticity's deepest stratum. The brain's own cell census is revisable. Structural change runs beneath synaptic change. And the dogma's ghost still walks in Rakic's live descent. This section explains why real skill acquisition reshapes the brain while commercial brain training does not. Plasticity indexes what you actually tax, nothing more. That is the whole chapter compressed. Commercial brain training fails because its games only exercise the game. They produce specificity without transfer, so a working memory drill sharpens that drill and leaks nowhere else. The Federal Trade Commission fined Lumosity for pretending otherwise. Genuine, sustained acquisition, a second language, an instrument, a martial art, reshapes both gray matter and white matter, and it transfers because it stresses a real faculty rather than a narrow score. Here is the predictive rule you can now run on any new case. Ask what demand the activity truly imposes. The brain remodels exactly that surface and no farther. Bilingualism's executive gains transfer. A maze of colored tiles does not. This section explains why the same brain rewiring produces phantom pain in one case and recovery in another. The cortex holds no empty territory. Strip a region of its input, sever a nerve, amputate or kill cells with a stroke, and neighboring maps immediately expand to occupy the vacated patch. That single homeostatic move, the map abhors a vacuum, generates both outcomes, the chapter contrasts. Its sign depends only on whether the invasion reconnects to a working, generates both outcomes, the chapter connects to a working input-output path. After amputation, the face map floods the hand's silent territory and connects to nothing useful. The result is phantom pain, maladaptive. After a stroke, the brain reroutes to parallel motor pathways that still reach the muscles. The result is recovery, adaptive. Same mechanism, opposite valence. The plasticity is blind, and its usefulness is set downstream by whether the rewiring lands on a functional target. Plasticity has no sign. This section turns over a rule the 7 prior chapters built up. Each of them showed the same thing, that a strong enough signal writes a lasting synaptic change, long-term potentiation, or LTP, and that this is how memory, skill, and recovery get built. This chapter reads that rule backwards. Addictive drugs drive dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway harder than any natural reward, and that drive induces long-term potentiation in the ventral tegmentum. Persistent injury induces the same potentiation at spinal pain synapses, the wind-up that amplifies each incoming signal. In both cases, the change outlives its cause. Here is the primitive. There is no separate maladaptive machinery. The word maladaptive only names the ordinary learning rule applied to an input that hijacks it. From this, you can predict any pathology of persistence. The substrate that remembers cannot choose what deserves remembering. This section explains how the 9th chapter unifies the whole book. Every earlier chapter isolated one mode of plasticity. Chapter 9 collapses them into a single time-parameterized process, with plasticity as the invariant, its gain and its substrate sliding monotonically along the life axis. The womb runs it at maximum, 250,000 neurons per minute, 2 million synapses per minute. Childhood fine-tunes. Adolescence prunes some 40%. Parenthood retunes maternal circuits. Senescence damps yet compensates. One machinery reclocked to each stage's task. The reversible rat pop epigenetics anchor the sharp acclaim. The gain never falls to zero. Experience keeps writing to the substrate lifelong, and the writes can be unwritten. Predict any life stage from this. Ask what the organism must learn now, and the plasticity budget follows. This section states the book's conclusion about plasticity. Cajal's picture of a fixed, immutable brain was the null hypothesis the whole book sets out to falsify. The conclusion states the replacement flatly. Plasticity is the default regime of neural tissue, not a mechanism the brain occasionally deploys. Change runs at every level, from gene expression to the cortical map, across timescales from milliseconds to years. The generative move is this. Any parameter you assumed constant, the myelin distribution, a mature neuron's transmitter, the 20 so-called types of basket cell, is actually a slow, activity-dependent state variable. The apparent taxonomy collapses to one continuum. Predict the next instance by asking what supposed fixity remains to dissolve. There is a boundary. The substrate is not infinitely malleable. Plasticity is bounded by its physical limits, and it is sometimes pathological, as in addiction and chronic pain.